I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here at BPM. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Very happy to be your host. Big shout out to Geechee for sending me the link to this video. I will make sure the entire video is in the show description. I don't know if the EYL crew will have time this coming Friday to get into this, but if we do, I'm sure there's plenty more to say beyond what I'm going to say about it in this video. So the more the merrier. But the other part of it is I really couldn't wait until next week. And we do have a special guest coming on Earn Your Liberation Friday morning. So I'm not even sure, like I said, I'm not even sure we'll have time to get to this story properly. And by then, who knows what other madness will have emerged. But like I said, if the EYL crew wants to jump on in, again, the more the merrier. I'm happy to have them do so, and maybe even to respond or add on to what I'm going to say here. But in the interim, what I'm going to do is take three very short excerpts from this recent discussion with Killer Mike and the Earn Your Leisure crew to demonstrate so much of what they and others continue to get wrong and to promote wrongly about race, class, and economics. So let's get into it.
You've been all over CNBC, CNN, Breakfast Club, all of that, and you've done a lot. But the latest thing that you've done is an online bank. A Black and Latinx owned, I believe, bank, right?
Yeah, it's a banking platform, right? Or a fintech bank, a neo bank. Our kids.
All right, just quickly, already major problems. From a critical media literacy perspective, we could start with the fact that, as was already said, Killer Mike is invited to all these commercial media platforms. It's very easy. He's very easily welcomed into those spaces. Those spaces exist to promote what he is here to promote. So we're already seeing part of what is so much of a problem, and why in my own work, so much of the discussion is around media and propaganda. The economics are, I feel like, less difficult to break down once the messaging is seen through, but it's that messaging that becomes such a problem. So already we're seeing just that. And then similarly, in this very first initial question and response, Mike is asked about the creation, and you can already see in my man's face asking the question. He's not clear, he's not sure, he's not confident in his question. He doesn't seem to fully have an understanding what's going on. And that's not necessarily, well, I mean, obviously, if you're running a huge platform that promotes and purports to be teaching Black people about finance, you should probably have done a little bit more homework and be better suited to give that information. But the reality is, it's not necessary. It's understandable that there would be confusion around this even a couple of years into this Greenwood Bank project, because as Mike struggles in his answer to explain, it's really not a bank. It's fintech, you hear him say, or financial technology. It's a neobank, as you hear him say. And we're going to come back to that and get into some of the details of what that means. But specifically, what Mike should have said is, out of the gate, no, it's not a bank. It is something else. But as we're going to get to, he can't do that, and he doesn't do that. So let's just keep going.
Do everything from their phone. Literally do everything. My 13-year-old do everything from a phone. So banking is going, as you see more brick and mortar closures, as you see banking expanding in the tech space, banking is going to end up in your hand, in your phone.
So right there again, he's describing this as something that is new, it's hot, it's the new direction where things are headed. And the Greenwood Bank project is here to capture those tendencies that are emerging within the Black community and elsewhere. And that's what it is. But he does not, and again, I'm putting the link in there. I'm only showing three excerpts, so anyone can go check the link to get the full conversation. And definitely feel free to let me know if you feel like I've taken anything out of context. And if you do, definitely just go ahead and
put it in the comments.
And I'll come back and happily address any corrections as they are necessary. But as I'm sure you'll see, it's not the case. He doesn't go on to explain anything more than what you've seen there. All right, so that's just clip one. Let's get to the second clip here, where so much more of what is wrong and so bad in this discussion is on display.
Young, who's a former ambassador, former lieutenant to Dr. King, former mayor of Atlanta, travels. It's 152 countries, I think. He's an ambassador, so he ambassadors all over the world.
He actually came to speak at my church.
Man, that's the man. Come on, man. You heard him.
Yeah, for sure.
But he's been my friend and mentor since 15 years old, and actually is a part of me growing me as an organizer. Andy doesn't do things for financially motivated reasons. Yet,
okay, let's just put a pin in that point. Put a pin in that point. Andy Young, the comrade of Dr. King, who has raised Mike politically since Mike was 15, doesn't do things for money. And as Mike goes into more detail in this conversation, he was brought into the Greenwood Bank project. He wanted to support it because he sees these brothers who found this bank doing something that's going to be good for Black people. And Andy Young, as Mike talks about it, some detail here in the full video, you can see at your convenience, at your leisure. Andy Young has a long history as mayor and et cetera of bringing business and money into Atlanta, into the Black community, in smaller portions, of course, because he's primarily known to, as Mike said, ambassador his way into bringing major banks and major elite white corporations into Atlanta, and a pittance of that, which may sound good in terms of the $1 billion this or the multi-million dollar that Mike talks about, might sound good, but the reality is it's a pittance in terms of what overall comes in. And of course, what does come to the Black community goes to Mike and his Black bourgeoisie, Black business class colleagues. It obviously does not get redistributed in any meaningful way to the rank and file working community, the working people of Atlanta, who, by the way, are currently still in this struggle against Cop City. And Mike, to my knowledge, still has not said anything about that, which I think is fascinating. If anybody has ever heard of him make any commentary publicly about Cop City, please send me the link to that as well. Anyway, let's continue with this clip.
They end up helping the greater community financially. So one example is, as mayor of Atlanta, he
trickle-down economics. Again, the promise that by bringing white businesses in with a smaller piece going to Black businesses, those Black businesses will trickle that down to the Black community. It's simply fantasy.
He's responsible for making Atlanta an international city by bringing the Olympics here. In bringing the Olympics, he didn't bring a bunch of people that just ran, swim, and jump that spoke different languages. Companies come also.
Companies come also. And then again, as he goes into some length, goes into it some length about how those companies get many billions, and then a small, lesser billion goes to the Black business community, and it's theoretically supposed to trickle down. But again, doesn't talk much about banking, doesn't talk much about how this is going to generate wealth for the community, and we'll come back to that point as well. So let's do one more short clip, and then just one more short clip, and then let's look at a couple of things that will hopefully work as somewhat of a corrective.
A guy named Paul Judge here out of the tech world. That's a brilliant guy.
I'm familiar with him.
Paul, Morehouse, and a bunch of bread, right? And then there's Ryan Glover, who built Noontime Records, who built Bounce TV, and who's a founding member of Greenwood. And they thought that this model, or models like this, as we go more digital, 65% of banking is done in the palm of your hand. Poor people need relief from being predatory companies. All of this can meet and make sense and be a for-profit thing. And Greenwood is born.
Anyway, so that clip was just a quick statement about the two founders, Glover and Judge, who we can see here as part of the team on the Greenwood page. You got Killer Mike, Andy Young, and I can't remember if this is Judge or Glover. That's Glover. Okay. And they're listed here as the founding team, which I think is interesting and is a little bit contradicted in something I'm going to show you here in just a second. Down here on the management team is where you see Glover and Dr. Paul George. And the doctor is a Georgia Tech PhD in computer. Well, I'm actually not entirely sure because it was listed as a PhD along with a master's in something like computer. It's a Georgia Tech degree in computing, cybersecurity, computers and cybersecurity, something like that. But when you go to the website at Georgia Tech, it only shows a PhD for computer science, which was not listed as the degree on this write-up about Judge that I did find. So I'm not entirely sure, but it really doesn't matter. PhD, no PhD, doctor in whatever field, it really doesn't matter. As we'll see, there's several flaws with the argument here. So, but this is the front face of Greenwood Bank. Okay, still. Although here it's interesting, they don't have Greenwood Bank per se. And I think that's important as well. Because now, and we've covered this before a little while ago. We've, when the bank was first, I think, launched a couple of years ago, or at least mentioned in terms of a renewed interest around Killer Mike a couple of years ago. We looked into it in terms of the originating funding, et cetera, and so forth. $3 million from was Jesse Williamson, the black actor, and then most of the money coming in from J.P. Morgan and other big banks. But this story from Bloomberg Business Week of April of 2022, roughly a little less than a year ago, is very telling, and I think important in terms of some of the claims we saw Mike laying out there in those clips. And again, the full link to the video is in the show description. Please have a look at it and any more that you'd like to. And if anybody feels I've taken anything out of context and have been unfair, obviously, we want to hear about it.
Put it in the comments.
So that said, this story, how Greenwood became the most hyped startup in Black America. Ryan Glover and Paul George knew nothing about finance, but 700,000 believers joined their exclusive wait list. Can their fintech actually repair centuries of racist banking? By Brett Pulley and Jordan Holman, Bloomberg Business Week, April of 2022. Over the past year and a half, 700,000 people have added their names to the waiting list of financial startup named Greenwood, as if it were a sneaker drop. Some thought it was an actual bank created by Atlanta's most prolific activists, Andrew Young Jr. and his modern-day civil rights counterpart, rapper Michael Killer Mike Render, that was trying to fix the racial wealth gap. Others thought it was a hot new secured credit card for the unbanked, a spin on Russell Simmons' decades-old Rush card. Then there are those who saw their favorite former Real Housewives of Atlanta star Tanya Sam fronting for Greenwood on Instagram, where the brand now has 166,000 followers. Many signed on simply because the mere mention of Greenwood, named for the 1921 massacre of Tulsa's Black Wall Street, which was thrust into national consciousness, when its 100-year anniversary arrived not long after the murder of George Floyd, had become the most effective shorthand for a black financial reckoning. So, by the way, in that video, Mike does go back into all of the mythology around Tulsa and Black Wall Street and talks about this as building, of course, Greenwood, named after the community in Tulsa that was torn down, destroyed, and ultimately rebuilt and destroyed properly by the state. But few want to talk about that because the white vigilante part and the claims around whether it's reparations or the Black business communities, what it's deserved and owed, et cetera, and so forth, is more suited to that. The story that resting it just on white vigilantes, because again, as we continue to argue here, it will that narrative of white vigilantes ultimately protects the idea that capitalism and the subsidiary of Black capitalism are suitable solutions. Again, I'm going to put a link to this article in the show description as well. So if anybody wants to read it more thoroughly, then I'm going to cover it here, and has any thoughts or feels there are any shortcomings in my analysis of it,
put it in the comments.
Okay. So here are a couple of things that are, anyway, it gets the claims that Mike makes in that short video, which just came out this week on Earn Your Leisure. Anyway, so many of the errors are spoken to here. I first of all, I think it's interesting how the article points out that it was in 2020 where Killer Mike soothed the city of Atlanta with the popular Bank Black hashtag, claiming that if we can get hold of the recirculation of Black wealth through money management, then I think it's a win for our people. Pinky Cole. This is Pinky Cole said, this article says saw Pinky Cole of Slutty Vegan saw Killer Mike soothe her city and wanted to get into the game. When Gigi Dixon, one of the highest ranking Black executives at Wells Fargo and Company, told her 30-something son that the bank would be investing in Greenwood, he laid bare the draw. When I think about Wells Fargo, I think about going to the bank, he told his mother. When I think about Greenwood, I think about cool. William Cooper, a Black heart surgeon who has medical practices in Atlanta and Kansas City, Missouri, sees Greenwood as a way to finally assert his economic muscle, which white banks have taken for granted for too long, saying that we want to be part of this emergence of Black economic power. So what exactly is Greenwood, which after months of delays is only partially open for business, letting in batches of customers every week? It's a fintech, a catch-all term for the hundreds of financial technology startups that have emerged over the past decade. While there are fintechs for payments, Stripe, lending, SoFi, buy now, pay later, Affirm, and stock trading Robinhood, Greenwood is part of the subset best described as neobanks. Again, Killer Mike used that catchword. Apps that offer banking services but aren't actually banks. But are not actually banks. Now, again, he's not able to make that clear in this Earn Your Leisure conversation. And of course, there's no follow-up from the two co-hosts who are more interested in promoting mythology than substantive economic analysis. So they don't ask him, well, what's the difference between this fintech neobank and an actual bank? And then how does this translate into a neo Black Wall Street, which is supposed to be good for Black people? Continuing here with this Bloomberg article, they're essentially digital storefronts that partner with and are powered by insured banks regulated by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So remember, just a few minutes ago, I showed you that storefront, the faced front on the Greenwood page, talking about who are their founders, who are their management team. They're very forward-facing, almost exclusively, with one maybe or another exception, Black, promoted heavily by Black male founders, a Black civil rights icon, and a Black rapper / quote-unquote activist who is even promoted as such in the recent PBS series on hip-hop history, all of which was heavily critiqued on this platform, including by yours truly. Thank you very much. While on the front end, a person interacts with a new, slickly branded virtual bank that appeals to a targeted customer group, Black people, aspiration pitches itself to environmentalists, chime to the cost-conscious. The back end is typically a small bank, one of many across America that now provides such a service. So, if you are cost-conscious of any background, go to Chime. If you are interested in environmental issues, go to Aspiration. And if you're Black, go to Greenwood. Like other neobanks, Greenwood offers checking accounts, saving accounts, and debit cards, and it eventually plans to roll out investment tools, small business loans, and mortgages. Ultimately, it wants to become the singular financial destination for the Black and brown middle class. The Black and brown middle class. But unlike most fintechs, Greenwood co-founders Paul Judge and Ryan Glover aren't going for just a demographic or psychographic play. They are pursuing an historical one rooted in more than 400 years of mistreatment and marginalization of Black people by financial institutions. Read differently, they're taking advantage of the hostilities Black people have suffered to promote a non-solution that will only benefit themselves, because many of us are scared of banks. We have the tragic story of the Freedman Savings Bank, but we don't learn from that story because we don't really talk about it. And when even Mayor Baradaran will write a book explaining how Freedman's Bank cannot work, could not have ever worked, even she is, to a certain extent, co-opted, in her argument, co-opted by Black banks and defenders of Black banks as them remaining to be a solution for Black people in the 21st century. Judge, a Georgia Tech PhD who co-founded several startups, including Pindrop Security, now valued at close to $1 billion, comes off more as an urbane local celebrity than a tech geek. I do not need to work anymore, says Glover, who lives in a $3.5 million gated mansion, I'm assuming that meant to say, in Atlanta's exclusive Chastain Park neighborhood. Describes his place as where Black and Latino people could aggregate, recirculate, and control their money, share financial knowledge, and not be beholden to predominantly white institutions. Banks don't understand the Black barbershop or the Black construction company, Judge says. Black businesses are denied access to capital and denied mortgages at twice the rate of their white counterparts. Now, remember, Glover, always about bringing Black people what Black people need, is the guy who, as an executive at Turner Broadcasting System, acquired Tyler Perry's House of Pain. This is where it starts to get even a little better, because what the founders did when they put together Greenwood, which we're going to come back to a little more detail in a moment, is not a bank, despite what Earn Your Leisure asked as a question and what Mike kind of tried to want to answer in that way, saying neobank, fintech, but answering initially, yeah, it's a bank, but yeah. Anyway, but what they did was they brought in Martin Luther King III, the son of the slain leader, Dr. King Jr., and Andy Young, who was at King's side when he was murdered in 1968, assassinated, to serve as co-founders on the board members, bestowing an aura of historical significance on the network and eventually giving both Young and King $5 million payouts. Because remember, Mike was in that video clip talking about Andy Young doesn't do it for the money. He does it for the people. And he brings money to the city, but he can't he can't make it on his own as the mayor at the time. And he's only doing it to help the Black people. He's not doing it for the money. Oh, but wait a minute. He got $5 million. But there's more. By the time the co-founders announced Greenwood in October 2020, Glover had assembled an NAACP roster's worth of Black entertainers, athletes, and civil rights figures. Greenwood's $3 million seed round investors, see, that was interesting. I'm just now thinking about this. So King and Young got $5 million payouts before so King III and Young got $5 million payouts before the bank had fully brought in its seed investment. Is that what I'm reading here? Because later it said, the next paragraph says Greenwood's $3 million seed round investors included Atlanta-based rapper and producer Jermaine Dupri, New Orleans Saints star running back Alvin Kamara, and Grey's Anatomy actor Jesse Williams. So That's more names than I remember. I thought Williams gave a bulk of this initial 3 million, but it took this many to come up with just 3 million, but they've already given 5 million, as I read this, to each King and Young. Both Young and King got $5 million payouts. Glover once again recruited Young. Now, so right, that's what I'm saying. So he's Young. Andy Young is recruited initially to give legitimacy to the project. He gets a $5 million payout. Then it says he's recruited again, now 90, along with Killer Mike, who's half Young's age. Neither activist would play a role in operating the business, but would become in return for equity the public faces of the brand. In return for equity. So Young got the $5 million payout. Killer Mike is on here for equity, according to Bloomberg Business Week. You know, okay. But I don't hear that in his discussions in all these media hits. That is, Mike comes across self-described, as you'll see in this clip if you watch it in its entirety, as an activist. He comes across as being concerned about Black people, but I don't hear it being discussed that he's actually a paid spokesperson or paid in equity. I'm assuming that means stock, to bring Black people in. So he's a walking commercial. Because as it says here, people of a certain age will remember what this tagline means, but the press and the public ate it up as though E.F. Hutton was talking. Shh, E.F. Hutton's talking. This is our time, says Mike. No, Glover, flanked by Young and Mike. This is our time to take back control of our lives and our financial structure. Amid all the news coverage, it was Glover and Killer Mike's appearance on CNBC last month that caught the attention of Vanessa Vreeland of Charlotte-based Truist Bank, created from the 2019 merger of BB&T and SunTrust. She reached out to Glover immediately. We know there is a completely undeserved market, and they have a distrust of the financial services community, said Vreeland, who's white. We saw Greenwood as a way to bridge that gap. So did many of the largest banks in the country that had recently been forced to do some very public soul searching in the wake of Floyd, that is George Floyd's murder in 2020. Again, to faithful BPM viewers, I Mix What I Like viewers, this sounds very familiar. This sounds very familiar, as we talked a good amount about around these parts of the response to George Floyd, coming from Bank of America, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, and the $300 million in equity commitments to minority-owned banks. So wait a minute. I don't even think this was as clear the first time I read this through. So wait a minute. In May of 2020, the banks say they're going to come up with $300 million to give minority-owned banks. In October of 2020, later that same year, Greenwood founders had assembled this NAACP's roster's worth of Black entertainers, athletes, and figures. So am I reading this correctly? That this Greenwood project is as much a money grab in the face of funds that were said to be slated for these exact kinds of ventures as it is any kind of real attempt at even a flawed method for solving the material inequalities facing Black people? I must be too cynical at this point. Because other vows followed. Wells Fargo would double Black leadership over the next 5 years. JP Morgan would expand Black and Latino home ownership. Citigroup senior execs would do stints at Black-owned banks to help them establish new lines of business. By March of 2021, Greenwood had raised $40 million in a Series A round with investors including JP Morgan, MasterCard, Truist, Visa, Wells Fargo, and SoftBank. And if anybody's ever watching all these documentaries about the founding of Uber, the founding of WeWork, and all these other ones, SoftBank is all up in that joint. Wow. But the reality was for just a few $1 million each. But the reality was for just a few $1 million each, the big banks could align themselves with a hot new black startup with cultural cred that's trying to solve the problems they'd largely propagated. That's pretty deep for a Bloomberg article. You white banks created the problem, and now you're going to get some, some symbolic credibility for helping a little black startup. Only 20 black-owned depository. So let me back up here for a quick second. To close this racial wealth gap once and for all, as the co-founders pitched their investors, they had hoped Greenwood could actually be powered by a black-owned FDIC regulated financial institution. Because, okay, all right, let me stay with the order of this article. So even going back to the earn your leisure point clips, black owned, for black people, black empowerment, black. But already we're seeing all this white bank money coming in. That does seem oddly timed with the promoted promise after George Floyd's killing that all this money was going to be made available. And we went through that. Remember, we went through that report where it was a total of $50 billion that the corporate world was supposed to be giving to the black community in a variety of ways. And most of it was going to nonprofits, financial literacy, this, that, or third, 300 million, which is a relatively small amount, to black businesses. But that was But then look at this part here. They said, so even this article acknowledges that those white banks that helped create the crisis, Wells Fargo, probably more than any, or at least in particular, now get to look good here. But as they were saying, so remember, it's supposed to be black. To close this racial wealth gap once and for all, as the co-founders pitched their investors, they hoped Greenwood could actually be powered by a black-owned FDIC-regulated financial institution, which would handle their transactions. But they soon discovered that ideal to be almost impossible. Only 20 black-owned depository institutions were still operating in 2020, with combined assets of $5.9 billion, according to the FDIC. JP Morgan Chase alone has $3.7 trillion in assets, even if cobbled together, not exactly a practical setup. So that's the point. And it's even a microcosmic look at what I put together in the Buying Power book around the same point, saying that if you took all of the so-called people of color banks combined, not just black, and put them together, the assets of all the black, brown, and Asian banks combined would not have the assets of even the top 3 white banks. They wouldn't even get close to the top 3 white banks alone have more than all of the 120 world majority people owned banks. But of the 20 black owned depository institutions, $5.9 billion compared to $3.7 trillion from just JP Morgan. There is no closing nothing. But look, what they did was instead, the founders ended up linking with Coastal Community Bank, a Washington state institution with $1.7 billion in assets that already supports more than 25 other fintechs and had an all-white executive management team. In other words, the fintech setting out to build a black-powered banking system was being funded by white-controlled banks and its services provided by another white-controlled bank. The revolution concedes, Glover, gets complicated. But we don't hear discussions of complications and nuances when we see Killer Mike and others go on these popular platforms talking about black this, black that, Greenwood this, circulate that, bank this, blah, blah, blah. We don't hear it gets complicated. We hear this is it. We don't hear him talking about the white bank that is the backing institution. We don't hear about the bigger white banks that Andy Young brought into this black-owned project. which clearly they wouldn't be doing if it was in fact a threatening element to redistributing wealth away from themselves. Greenwood will make money the same way most other digital banking platforms do, by earning interest fees every time a customer swipes a debit card. Part of the allure of neobanks is that they don't have to support expensive branch networks. Even in my little section in the Buying Power book around banking, that was one of the issues that I picked up on from Marisa Baradaran's work. That Black banks can never catch up, in part because they never have the amount of deposits necessary, and it's never going to help here because the amount of debit card swipes producing interest for Greenwood, what is that going to amount to? Instead, without a fully functioning product, the smoothest part of Greenwood's operation so far has been its content arm, which it's hoping will serve as a customer acquisition machine. Greenwood Studios, an in-house production company, has been building its audience for more than a year and a half, cranking out as many entry points as possible for Black people to discover the brand and end up and sign up for it. Greenwood Daily and the bi-weekly Ask Me Anything About Money video series, the latter starring Sahirinus Pierce, Pierce, a sort of Suze Orman for the Latinx set. Have an accessible talk to your girlfriend, nothing is too embarrassing to ask vibe, diving into everything from inflation and capital gains to more actionable, timely topics such as President Joe Biden's new temporarily expanded public service loan forgiveness waiver. Greenwood's website offers Green Book, an online directory of Black and Latino businesses that can drive the recirculation of dollars in our communities. It has also amassed a network of unpaid brand ambassadors, mostly small business owners such as Slutty Vegans Cole, who want in on what feels like the beginning of a movement. And of course, Glover leverages all of the celebrities in the Greenwood mix. Dupree shows up on Instagram feed unboxing his new Greenwood credit card. It smells like money. Real Housewives Sam hosts a daily financial planning podcast, and Grey's Anatomy Williams stars in a Greenwood ad. Are you ready to let the Black dollar circulate? You ready to bet on Black for real? The bigger Greenwood gets, says Glover, the more it can create access to working capital, eradicate predatory lending, and recirculate the capital in our communities. First, though, the product needs to launch at scale. When and if it does, even with all these pieces in place, revered Black entrepreneurs, celebrities, activists, major banks, Atlanta is pitch perfect branding and timing. One wonders whether the fintech can actually do the audacious thing Judge and Glover set out to do in the first place. Can Greenwood revolutionize Black wealth? Can it close this racial wealth gap once and for all? Obviously, no. Obviously, no. If for no other reason to drive home the point of why no. This is the Coastal Community Bank that backs the project. And this is the team leadership of that bank. Why would these folks put up their billions to support this effort if it was a legitimately revolutionary endeavor for Black wealth? Because we are clear, right? For the gap, were this racial wealth gap or divide to close, that means, given it's a zero-sum game, white folks have to lose wealth, or Black people have to increase wealth to reach parity with white wealth, which in effect reduces the value of that white wealth. How is that wealth going to be created? How is that going to happen? None of that is answered by this project, and it's clearly just a fantasy project. So when I saw that video come out again just the other day, and I watched these clips and Mike's clear distortions of reality, it's really unfortunate. And that Earn Your Leisure is situated to have such an impact. It's unfortunate. All right, so that's it. we got to get past these mythologies if we're going to get to any real solutions. So I hope this helps in some way, break past some of the distortion. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, do what you can to support the BPM platform. Thanks to all who already do that. Make sure that bell is clicked so that you don't miss any of the many offerings throughout this entire platform. And I'll catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like. Peace, as Fred Hampton used to say, only if you're willing to fight for it. Thanks, everybody. Catch you next time.